So, Scott, it's wonderful to have you on again. We just had a pretty intense situation happen yesterday. A brief summary of it is, of course, a journalist was killed in a cafe in St. Petersburg when a woman brought a figurine into an award ceremony event and it blew up, killed him, killed others, wounded a lot of people. The woman was subsequently caught in a apartment belonging to a friend of her husband, and she is being interrogated, and she has reported that she was recruited by a gentleman who had been training her in journalism. Popoff, I think his name is. I'll go into the details later. But he was allegedly had given her this statue, claiming a listening device was inside that his contact in the Ukrainian intelligence SBU had been planning or targeting. So it falls into this larger intelligence assassination targeting operation, which I just had a conversation with Senator Dick Black, who he fully says the CIA, of course, are involved with a lot of these operations and targeting and such. But I'll hand it to you. Give us your assessment on what happened, what we should know about it, and also how this maybe is a game changer or what is going to flow as a result of this. Go ahead, Scott Ritter.
Well, first of all, it's too early to make any definitive judgments. I mean, it happened yesterday. The investigation is ongoing. Arrests have just been made. I would be loath to embrace fully initial claims made by a defendant in this, in a case such as this. I mean, it may be true, everything she says. It also might be a diversion designed to buy time for others to escape, to lead the Russians down a false path. So it's just far too early to draw any definitive conclusions. What we do know is that a noted Russian journalist slash blogger, Maxim Fomin, who wrote under the pseudonym of Vladimir Tatarsky, is dead. And that this was a deliberate act. No one can say this was an accident. A device was delivered, the device detonated, and he died. Nobody has publicly claimed responsibility for this. He is, of course, somebody or was somebody on the notorious Mirotorov's death list, just like Daria Dugina, the daughter of Alexander Dugin was. She was assassinated last year in a car bomb attack in Moscow. It's interesting, the silence on the part of the United States when it comes to this. The United States has defended a free press for some time now, but only a free press that operates within the confines of a U.S.-backed narrative. When Maria Colvin was killed in Syria in 2012, the United States allowed her case to proceed to a U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., where Judge Amy Jackson handed down a $300+ million settlement against the Syrian government, accusing it of targeting Maria Colvin for assassination, even though she was in Syria illegally, and she was co-located with what they called a media center, but it was really a command post, engaged in active combat operations against the Syrian government. So, and Judge Jackson said that, if we allow something like this to go forward unpunished, it will have a chilling effect on those people who report from war zones. And she said we have an absolute need to have the voices of war correspondents and the voices of what the truth is about war, even if it's in opposition to one side or the other. To deny that is an abridgment of free speech. And yet Tatarsky has been killed and the U.S. government is silent. And why are they silent? For some time now, the Mirotorov's hit list has been known. My name's on it. And I have wrote my senators, my representatives in Congress, and said that this is egregious. That Ukraine, an ostensible ally of the United States, is actively promulgating a list marking people for death for exercising their free speech. You know, the duty and responsibility of journalists is not to echo the narrative of the U.S. government, but to call out truth. The Supreme Court of the United States has said this over and over and over again. Um, but that's not good enough for the Biden administration. They are silent as American citizens are marked for death by the Ukrainian government for the crime of daring to put forward a fact-based narrative that differs from the propaganda that they're spewing. Now, we don't know exactly who has put the Mirotvorets list out there. It's widely alleged that it's done by these Ukrainian security services, the SBU, but it's murky. What we do know, though, is that the Office of the Presidency of Ukraine operates what's called a Center for Countering Disinformation. CCD is the thing. We know that it's funded exclusively by the United States, by Europe, by NATO, and that the U.S. State Department plays an active role in organizing its events and promulgating its messages and sustaining its work. In fact, the U.S. State Department was present in a meeting it organized on July 14th, 2022, where the Center for Countering Disinformation put forward what it called a blacklist containing the names of foreigners who dare speak out against Ukraine. My name was on that list. Others were on it as well. The U.S. government obviously knew this because it created the organization that created this list and created the meeting where this list was published. I notified my representatives about this. They were silent as well. You know, some interesting constitutional issues. First Amendment, the United States Congress will not enact laws that abridge free speech. The U.S. government or the Ukrainian government is funded by a law passed by the U.S. Congress in May of 2022. That money was used to create the Center for Countering Disinformation, and we know the U.S. government has shaped its work and helped pursue its work of silencing Americans for the crime of free speech. So I think a case could be made that we have a clear First Amendment right, but rights be damned. People are dying.
Well, let me interject on that level. You are exactly right, and you do have a class action legal case against the United States government that could be joined by Tucker Carlson, Senator Dick Black, and others whose names appear on that list, because it is not just a threat to their freedom of speech. It is an ominous, foreboding, wanted poster for your head, to kill you, to assassinate you, to blow you up, to hurt you and other members of your family, as many others, because you're speaking truth, because you're American. Isn't that what Americans are supposed to be and do and represent to the world? Truth speakers, men of honor. And yet the United States government, State Department under Joe Biden, this current tyrannical regime of lunatics and hypocrites and every form of pathological disorder and sickness, they are waging a war indirectly by proxies in Ukraine against their own American citizens for, violation of your life, not just your rights. And it is amazing to me, and I do honestly think there is a class action immediate lawsuit that should be filed to say this is an assault on my life. You are trying to kill me by using a proxy because of our reporting of the truth about all of the disinformation, misinformation, falsity, propaganda that the West has been engaging in. That the American people, if they knew what I knew, would rise up as a mass in this country like never before and overthrow this entire pro-Ukrainian American corrupt establishment that has been funneling money, that has been doing biochemical war lab developments, that has been doing money laundering through FTX, all sorts of other things, child pedophilia, you can get into everything. That's the truth which journalists like Takarsky has been speaking. That's what you've been speaking in various ways. That's how Senator Black and others. So I just wanted to put it out there. This is an extraordinarily serious issue and moment, because every American is on the line. The whole thing it has a potential for, I mean, incredible backlash. And we'll get into where this is going next, how this is unfolding as a conflict. But I'll hand it back to you. Go ahead, Scott.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I'm as angered as anybody is about this. Again, Amy Jackson, the judge that put down the Maria Colvin case, warned that if the assassination of journalists wasn't confronted, and we should note that the Syrian government takes umbrage at the notion that it assassinated Maria Colvin, saying that she was co-located with an enemy command post during time of war while she was there illegally. But nonetheless, the death of a journalist reporting, is a chilling thing. It makes it difficult for other people to report. It sends a signal that you do so at your own risk. Now, one would think that when confronted by attacks of this nature, that people would rally around the truth and rally around the journalists. But again, we only do so when the message is convenient. Let me just throw out a name here, Scott. Julian Assange, one of the greatest truth tellers of our time. A man who had the audacity to publish information that exposed the war crimes and other malfeasance on the part of the U.S. military and U.S. government in Iraq and Afghanistan. The information he published was published by outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and they did so knowing that what he was publishing was true, and knowing that it was important that this information get out to the masses, because that's what a free press does. It cuts through the lies of government and exposes these lies to we, the people. And in doing so, we shine a light on it, and we can disinfect the poison that these lies represent. Julian Assange, even though he's not an American, he's an Australian. He did the American people one of the greatest services they could possibly imagine. And as a result, he has been incarcerated since 2019 in Belmarsh Prison in London, in the worst possible conditions with deteriorating health, because the United States is seeking his extradition so that he can be brought up on espionage charges in the Eastern District of Virginia, a jurisdiction known for not losing an espionage case. Let me put it this way. He will be found guilty if brought to trial, and he will be sent to jail in a maximum security facility for a period of 175 years. In effect, he will be sentenced to death. And if anybody knows anything about the reality of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons and incarceration in American isolation conditions, he will die long before that. He may never see trial. In fact, I predict he will never see trial. He will be dead long before this case goes to trial. And that is by intent. See, the United States kills journalists. This is what we do. We kill journalists to silence dissent. And that's why we are silent, we being the United States. And I'm condemning all Americans, all Americans. Where are you, America, on Julian Assange?
Yes.
We held a rally outside the Department of Justice, and let's say a few score people, maybe 100 or so, showed up. There should have been 1 million people in the streets. There should be 1 million people in the streets every day, sending a clear signal to the U.S. government that you shall not get away with the silencing of a man whose only crime is telling the truth about your crimes.
Yeah, and Trump
crimes committed by the
Trump should have pardoned.
Trump should have pardoned him, but Trump didn't pardon, because Trump, no matter how much he railed against the so-called swamp, he was knee deep in the swamp. He surrounded himself with the swamp. He painted himself with the swamp. And then at the end of the day, he became the swamp. So no, this is an American problem, an Obama problem. This is a Trump problem. This is a Biden problem. This is a me problem. This is a you problem. This is everybody's problem, because as it is happening to Julian Assange, it shall too happen to you. If you think for a second we have a free press, understand this. If you think we have free speech, understand this. There's nothing free about it. There's a heavy, heavy price being paid by those who are seeking to get information out there. You don't have to agree with me. They don't have to agree with you. And you can think that Julian Assange was wrong in what he did. But you don't silence them through persecutions, through murder. The way you oppose dissenting points of view is to engage them civilly in a debate, a discussion, a dialogue where facts matter, arguments matter. Make it before the public, and the side that has a stronger argument, who can articulate it in a clearer voice, prevails. And that's what a free speech is about. But that's not what the US government wants. I can tell you right now, I can take on anybody in the US government on issues pertaining to Iraq, Russia, Ukraine, and I will crush them like little bugs in a civil debate, discussion, and dialogue. They don't want that. What they want is for me to shut up. They want you to shut up. They want others to shut up. They're seeking to intimidate us right now by putting us on these lists, by putting us on not only lists calling us terrorists and war criminals, but lists marking us for death in hopes that we will somehow lose the backbone, become the jellyfish that is the mainstay of American journalism today. There is no one with a spine in mainstream media today. But no, that's not what we're going to do. Are we suicidal for this? No. Were Minutemen suicidal for standing, at Bunker Hill, at Concord, at Lexington? Were the people who defended in Gettysburg Day 3 held the high water mark suicidal? Were the Marines that charged Bill Wood, Iwo Jima, suicidal? No. They were willing to put it all on the line, to give the last full measure in defense of a cause they believed in. And the American cause is a cause defined by the Constitution of the United States of America, the First Amendment of which is free speech, without which there can be no Constitution, there can be no America, there can be no freedom. And yet we are sitting here collectively, sheep, looking for our shepherd. And that shepherd is the US government. We're saying, please, please lead us to safety. And we follow the shepherd compliantly, not knowing that he's leading us to slaughter, because that is the fate of all sheep.
Yeah, powerful, powerful words, and absolutely true. And I concur. It is a remarkable display of degeneration, mental retardation almost, that has come over this country in a darkness like ancient Egypt, when God gave darkness to the land, as well as other plagues, bugs and frogs and leprosy and all sorts of things. This is being visited upon the United States in a spiritual way, I see, in my own personal opinion, on so many levels. That it's remarkable, and the bloodshed that we've caused, and the destruction we've caused throughout the last 20 years. I think this really is coming to haunt us. And the not to go on a tangent, but the whole LGBT homosexualization that we're trying to push in Ukraine, in Africa, in these nations, they're violently rejecting it, as they should. And yet we are encouraging children under 18 to have transgender surgeries, this victimization class, this whole internal moral decadence and death that's coming upon this country is astounding to me. It's remarkable to me, and amplifying that, it's almost like we're creating ourselves to be so toxic, so ugly, so deformed, so schizophrenic, and we're trying to spread that as the gospel to these other nations through diplomatic tyranny and military conquest. We did it in Ukraine. All of the nations of the world are separating, saying, no, we're done with you. We're done with the petrodollar. We're going to another BRICS, Shanghai, or other association where we're not going to be killed, put at risk, or have this death infected into us. So the internal degeneracy is driving an international, global degeneracy of the United States that I think is going to be lethal. I think we're going to break up into all sorts of ways in the coming days and stuff. But I'll hand it back to you, Scott. Go ahead.
Well, the interesting thing is that everything you just put forward is your point of view, and you have the freedom to put that forward. Some people might find it very controversial. I myself might choose to debate you on certain of those topics, but you have every right to say what you just said. But people will seek to silence you because of it. People will seek to shut you down. They won't have the courage to confront you. They won't have the character to say, "Hey, Scott, I heard what you said, but how about we have a discussion about it? Let's talk about it. Let's work this one through. I think you're wrong on this one." That's what made the American society the greatest ever. I believe in diversity, but I believe in diversity within reason, meaning there has to be constraints put on a society, or else the society will spin out of control. Now, I would prefer these constraints be as unrestrictive as possible. I believe in the inherent good of people. I believe that society will, generally speaking, opt to do the right thing collectively when given a chance to debate, discuss, and have a dialogue about the critical issues that confront us. But when extreme solutions are shoved down the throats of the collective, and anybody who dares dissent is immediately castigated as wrong, a criminal, some other thing, or killed, then there is no debate, because the process of debate becomes a process of self-identification, further persecution by the government. The process of a dialogue does the same thing, puts the mark of death on you. This is why free speech is so important. This is why we have to have it. Because without a free speech, what happens is the government weaponizes the concept of disinformation. You see, I understand how fearful disinformation can be, especially in this day and age of social media, where we no longer have, the triple letter news organizations serving as the adults in the room to filter information before it appears before us in the evening news, or we don't have the editorial staffs of the Washington Post and the New York Times to decide what is appropriate for the above the fold headline and what disappears on A14 and what doesn't make it at all. But there was a time when we trusted these professionals like we would a medical doctor, like we would a pilot. I don't demand to see the qualifications of a pilot when I get on an airplane, because I just assume that the system has done the right thing and put an appropriately qualified, trained person behind the controls of the aircraft that I'm entrusting my life to. The same thing when I go to see a doctor. Yes, I can examine the impressive parchment on the wall and say, wow, you got educated here, there, and everywhere. But I don't demand that I get access to the results of every single diagnosis he made, surgery he made, find out if he was correct, wrong, etc. I just assume that the system is designed to weed out those who are not qualified to do the job. That's important. And we used to make the similar assessments about editors at the New York Times, at the Washington Post, of the journalists at CBS, ABC, NBC, but not anymore. You see, because nobody practices journalism anymore. They practice activism. And they have lost the ability to operate independent of the pressures placed on them by the US government in a 24-hour news cycle, where you have to refresh your headline every so often to attract the viewers necessary to sustain the advertising dollars, because this is not about the news, ladies and gentlemen. This is about gaining access to advertising dollars, because it's a business. The government is the number one provider of headline generating material, because it is a so-called voice of authority. So these journalists have stopped doing the job. They don't have time to do the job. When you have to refresh the headline every so often, you can't take a time out and do the deep dig. You are prisoner to the phone call. The phone call comes in from your source. The source dictates a story. You are a stenographer, not a journalist, and you type it up, you present it to your producer, who immediately pushes it in, because you have to get it in before the other people who are getting similar phone calls get it in. You have to be number one to get that first click, become the lead story, click, 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 click. That's journalism today. And that's the reality. So we can no longer assume that the people that are responsible for putting the news out there are giving us the truth. In fact, we have to assume the other, that they're not giving us the truth, that they're seeking, we talk about propaganda, the mainstream media is an American propaganda service, straight up propaganda service. So now what happens when you have a propaganda service? Um, Again, what we call disinformation. Now, it might have been disinformation if we had genuine journalists, genuine editors who took the effort to come up and say, this is stuff that we can corroborate, it's good, it's sourced, we're going to get it out there. And someone comes in with a piece of information and they go, oh, no, 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 no. We did that one. That's garbage. That's disinformation. That's put into the. I accept that as disinformation, and I agree that maybe it shouldn't be run on the mainstream news. I disagree in saying that the editor is the sole purveyor of determining if that's disinformation. I think we should be trusted with that information, be able to look at it and say, yeah, yeah, that does stink, or whoa, whoa, you guys missed something here. What about this argument? You know, free speech, free citizens, free thinking. But no, disinformation now is any dissent. When they say we are countering disinformation, what they're saying really is we are suppressing dissent. We are preventing dissenting voices from being heard. And people say, well, gosh, I mean, is that really a bad thing? Let me just put it out for you straight up, ladies and gentlemen. In 2002, I was a dissenting voice in the build up to the war in Iraq. Now, some people tried to paint me as an agent of disinformation, Iraqi disinformation. Had the US government controlled the media today the way they controlled it back then, my voice would have been effectively silenced. Now, for those who say that I was an agent of disinformation, I want to point out that I was 100% correct on everything I said, factually and analytically. That it wasn't disinformation, it was the truth, and the government was actively trying to suppress the truth. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. The next time people talk about people who are putting out a differing assessment about the war in Ukraine or elsewhere. You don't have to agree with what we're saying. You have no right to silence us. The beauty of the internet is, Scott, when they opt to tune into your podcast, halfway through they can go, Ritter is full of it. Click, and there's the beauty of that click. Bam, shut down. You don't have to listen to me anymore. You have that right. Just like when I turn on the television and I look at a talking head on CNN, rather than throwing a brick through my TV, which becomes a very expensive proposition, I can simply go click and the voice is silent. That's the way you silence voices you don't want. You can opt out and say, I refuse to listen. Now, I would actively encourage people not to do that because it's imperative that we listen to all points of view so we derive our own independently formulated conclusions. But if you want to silence somebody, silence them with the clicker. Don't silence them by killing them, by imprisoning them, by prosecuting them, by persecuting them, by making the mere execution of free speech a capital crime.
You said something earlier about your analytics of the earlier Iraq war in 2002, and you were proven true and accurate, and everything that you said actually came to pass. And had the government, had the people listened, we would never have had the fiasco and the chaos and the conspiracy that we unfolded in the Iraq war and elsewhere. But shifting to today, Nebesnia was at the United Nations shortly ago and had said, a few days ago, and had said, did you really think we weren't going to react when you were doing this and doing that? And it struck me because it has a resonance with what you did. There is grotesque, ignorant miscalculation with regards to the Russian personality, the Russian identity, the Russian culture. You know them better than anyone. They're very direct. They're very blunt. They're very, Russian. They're very earthy, and they don't have this blinking, effeminate, cloudy, adaptive, effusive. We'll say one thing, but it may mean another, and we get very, very I don't know how to even describe it, very fanciful, and we puff all sorts of language in there. The Russians don't. The Russians are concrete when they talk about their moral principle convictions and their agenda and their policies and their red lines and things like that. Nebesnia has said repeatedly, all sorts of things are going to be happening. This was particular about Belarus and putting nuclear weapons in Belarus to protect Russia from the encroachment, the advancements, the hostility that the West and NATO is continuing to pursue. I use that as a preface or preparatory for this event that just happened in St. Petersburg. Given what Russia's been saying and doing and how they've been prosecuting this conflict, which I think has been extraordinarily surgical and slow and delicate for probably political international purposes, which have ultimately worked to their advantage. But where we are now with the St. Petersburg blowing up, the terrorist attack, where that goes, how do you see Russia reacting moving forward from this point on as a result of this? How do you see the kaleidoscope of Russian political, military information choices manifesting? Go ahead, Scott.
The Russians made a decision early on. I mean, it's an initiating decision not to go to war against Ukraine, but instead to prosecute what's known as a special military operation. Now, this term has been mocked in the West. It just underscores the ignorance of those who opt to mock it. I mean, I've actually had people tell me in a forum of ostensibly respected journalists that they don't speak Putin. So they refuse to use the term special military operation. You may not speak Putin, but by doing that, you expose your ignorance and indeed the ignorance of all those affiliated with you. Because if you don't understand what the special military operation is, you don't understand its reality, you can't possibly begin to accurately assess what's going on in Ukraine today. If you think that this is an invasion, if you think Russia's at war, if you think this is an act of aggression, that shows a bias, prejudice on your part that makes it impossible for you to understand what's really happening. This is why the scope and scale of the Russian victory that's unfolding has escaped notice in the West because they just don't understand it. They're looking for something that's not there instead of looking for what is there. And a key aspect of the special military operation is that Russia has been actively searching for a peaceful resolution to this problem. It's not Russia that has opted to escalate continuously, it's the West. The phase one of the special military operation, which the West has characterized as a military defeat by Russia on Russia by Ukraine, was anything but. What were the goals and objectives? Now, it could be called a defeat if you thought that Russia was actually trying to take Kiev, that Russia was actually trying to strip away significant portions of Ukrainian territory. But we know that's not the truth. We know that Russia negotiated in good faith 3 times in Gomel, Belarus, that led to a fourth and what should have been a final negotiation in Istanbul on April 1st of 2023 or 2022. But it was NATO that pushed the Ukrainians out of that. Russia's job in phase one was to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. They succeeded. And they had a peace treaty in hand that would have made the Ukrainians basically say that Crimea is Russia forever, that Donbass and Lugansk are independent, that they can't join NATO. And that's it. That's it. Had Ukraine signed that agreement there, hundreds of thousands of people would be alive today. $1 trillion worth of infrastructure would not have been destroyed. 20 million people would not have been displaced. The death, destruction, the suffering, the inhumanity that has transpired in the course of a year now would not have occurred. This is not Russia's fault. This is America's fault. But look how Ukraine opted to come out of their walking away from the negotiating table to distract the world's attention from the fact that all bloodshed that transpires afterwards is on Ukraine and the United States. They manufactured an event in Bucha. And they basically accused the Russians of committing a horrific war crime when all the data screams it was Ukraine that did it. But look at how the mainstream media has fallen in on this. The New York Times, National Public Radio, the AP and others are just basically parroting without any effort to dig into the truth, ignoring, uh, you know, ignoring the fact that a Ukrainian official said a cleansing operation is taking place, that Ukrainian security services said that the cleansing operation involves the hunting down and killing of collaborators and saboteurs, and that video exists of the Ukrainian security services killing people who aren't wearing the blue armband of loyalists. They ignore that. Not a single mainstream media outlet has pursued any of this, none whatsoever. We don't have the forensics carried out, on the autopsies of the bodies. We don't know the time of death. We don't know what caliber bullet struck them. There's been no crime reconstruction scene showing where the bullet or the shrapnel came from, who fired the shell. These are all essential things that could have been done. I mean, after all, it was the Ukrainian government that regained control of this territory. Why wouldn't they do this? Because the truth is not what they're searching for. They're searching for the shaping of perception, the perception that Russia committed a war crime, and it's the war crime that becomes the story, not the fact that Ukraine walked away from basically a finished, ceasefire agreement that would have saved so many lives. And so when people come out and speak out against this, again, we talk free speech. I committed the crime of saying Ukraine did Bucha. And I'm telling you right now, Ukraine did Bucha. No doubt. Again, I've challenged everybody, the Ukrainians, the Americans, the European Union. You want to have a debate on this? Let's do it in public. I'd love to go to Oxford, England, and have the Oxford debate, with the proposition, who committed the crimes of Bucha? Bring it on. You can have a team of 1 million. I'll kill you, theoretically speaking. I will crush you from a rhetorical standpoint. I will overwhelm you with facts. I will confront you with details that you can't escape.
Right.
But they don't want to do that because they want the fiction of it. So I was punished by being banned from social media, from Twitter. I was punished by being put on the Center for Countering Disinformation's Russian propaganda list. And that has a chilling effect. We want to talk about chilling effect. Talk about the loss of income. Now, I don't, I'll respect the details of the contracts of the organizations I wrote for, even though I no longer work for them. But I will tell you that the three outlets that I no longer write for, that I once wrote for, the income there combined income easily covered 50% of my mortgage and bills. Now, how many people out there, if your employer suddenly said, hey, because you rooted for the Washington, well, we can't call them Washington Nationals, I'm going to deny you 50% of your income. Can you survive? We live today in a nation where people survive paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. Now imagine losing 50% of your paycheck like that. That's what happens. That's why I say there's no such thing as free speech. Free speech ain't free. There's a heavy price to be paid for it, especially when they come after you in an effort to silence you. And again, I don't want to, this is me, wham, wham, wham kind of stuff, but it's something that everybody has to pay attention to. But, as we're sitting here, I'm alive. I'm breathing. They haven't gotten to me yet. Mr. Tatarsky can't say that. He's dead. He was targeted by people who didn't like his voice. And here's the irony of it. Because if you are a true proponent of free speech, did not the lunatics that killed this man understand that his voice wasn't the voice of, flag waving, Kremlin embracing Russian propaganda? This was a man who was very critical, not of the need for the conflict, but of the way it was being prosecuted. He was critical of decisions made by the Russian government. Now, I happen to believe that his voice and the voices of others out there are extraordinarily valuable because they, again, if you're a society that wants to grow stronger, you need dissenting voices calling government out, where mistakes are believed to have occurred, and Mr. Tatarsky was doing that. I think that if the goal of the Ukrainians was to somehow silence, the most vocal proponent of the special military operation, they failed because they silenced one of the most vocal critics of the special military operation. But again, I don't think that's what they were looking at. They're just seeking to silence. They're seeking to intimidate. They sent a signal that you can live in Moscow, you live in St. Petersburg, and we can get you. And
But
so now, who dares speak out has to wake up in the morning thinking, is this the day that they get me?
and see, that's leading me into the what will be the effect of this on the military and intelligence minds in Russia, in Moscow, in Putin's command structure. What are they going to begin doing as a result of this? Because you're right, they're trying to send this message, but I think Russia is temperamentally, when you do something like this, their response is overwhelming, ruthless, final, and crushing. And I'm just wondering what that action is going to be in
Um,
Ukraine, in the
yeah,
diplomatic circles. Go ahead.
I the reason why I started off by talking about the special military operation is to point out that Russia is not at war and Russia doesn't want to go to war.
Right,
So anybody out there saying that Russia needs to go to war now because of Tatarsky, you're crazy.
right.
First of all, what does war mean? Understand that if Russia declares war, that's total mobilization.
Yes.
So all effort that Russia has been undertaking to preserve its economy in the aftermath of being sanctioned by the collective West, to restore economic health, to pivot the economy to the east, all of that will be done away with. For what? I have, my heart bleeds for Mr. Tatarsky, for Maxim Fomin. That was his real name. But every day, scores, dozens of Russian soldiers are being killed on the battlefield.
Mhm.
They're dying in support of a strategy that's been taken by the Russian government designed to achieve an outcome that fits their strategic purpose. War does not fit their strategic purpose. Prevailing in the special military operation does. There's a lot of emotion right now, but one thing that you can say about the government of Vladimir Putin is that they have been the adults in the room,
Yes.
and they have been actively pursuing policies designed to avoid escalation.
Mhm.
Yes, the assassination of Maxim Fomin in St. Petersburg was an affront to all Russians. It's an insult to Russia.
Mhm.
It's an insult to everybody. And so too was the attack on the Crimea bridge, the Kerch bridge.
Mhm.
What did Russia do in response to that? There were some retaliation, but they didn't declare war. What did
Right.
Russia do? They repaired the bridge. And today, this repaired bridge exists as a means of telling the world that Russia will survive, Russia will prevail. What Russia didn't do is force itself to deviate from the strategic path towards victory it was enjoying by going off on some revenge. My dog's hyper revenge-based desire to kill. That's the maturity of the Russian position.
Right. No, I agree with that 100%. That is the maturity. They're very strategic. They're very intelligent when they come to that, and they're not going off onto a tangent. My curiosity in bringing that up is we're at the last stages of this special military operation where Russia will inevitably um, is in the capture of Bakhmut and Artyosk and the other areas. They're prosecuting this and bringing it to finality, and I'm wondering their quickening effect, or what their next tactical um, uh, actions are going to be in finishing this, because I'm thinking they're going to try and ramp it up and finish this quickly. This is sort of a bleeding wound. They certainly don't want, and I would put this as another question: is the United States going to try and trigger some sort of false flag to justify their own more direct involvement or intervention? I mean, even though that is the most insane thing you could imagine, we're dealing with the most insane presidential administration and Congress in the history of the United States. I wouldn't put anything past them. So I'll put it back to you, Scott, in the final days, weeks, month of the prosecution of this conflict. Go ahead.
Well, I still believe that this conflict will be over by the end of summer, early fall. Is there a possibility that it could be accelerated? Possible. There's still a lot of fight left in Ukraine. The defeat at Bakhmut. I know Russians will take offense at that word, but until you capture it, I guess Ukrainians still get to name it. So if you want me to call it something else, capture it. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of fight left in Ukraine. This war isn't over. Um, and Russians are going to continue to die, and so are Ukrainians. But the momentum, the trajectory of the battle. There's somebody at the door, so I'm trying to control this. But can you hear me? Okay.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you.
All right. I apologize for this. The dogs are simply trying to protect the home from potential Ukrainian assassins. But but the fact of the matter is, there's still some fight left in the Ukrainians. There's a lot of work left to be done, but the momentum is with Russia. I think Bakhmut will go down in history as the decisive battle of the war. If Prigozhin is correct and he has not misled anybody at all about the facts of the situation on the ground, he said that Ukrainian army was defeated at Bakhmut, and the numbers tend to back that up. But being defeated and actually surrendering are two different things. And I see this fight continuing because their backs are up against the wall. There's a military side to this, and then there's a post-war side. The demilitarization is taking place right now. That is the physical destruction of the Ukrainian military. And I think the Russians are in a mood to continue doing this. I think there's a desire to see this through to the end. Then there's the denazification. And, it's not my place to put warnings out there, but I would just say that, for all the people out there that are, anxious for Russian revenge, there's an old saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. Right now, the Tatarsky meal is hot.
Yes.
There'll be time for it to chill off. All those who participated in that crime, in the murder of Daria Dugina, and other crimes perpetrated against prisoners of war, against civilians, their names are known. And there will be an accounting. But Russia doesn't need to deviate off of this path to victory it currently is on.
Right.
You don't destroy everything that you've sacrificed so much for. To get yourself to this position to bring an end to this conflict simply because another tragedy occurred. This entire experience in Ukraine has been nothing but one tragedy on another tragedy on another tragedy. Some of those tragedies are the unavoidable consequences of war. Other tragedies have been perpetrated by the criminal regime in Kiev, its intelligence services, the brutal neo-Nazis that permeate that. They haven't succeeded yet to get Russia off course, and I don't think the assassination of Maxim Fomin is going to be that which pushes them. All it is one more file that's going to be opened up, populated with names, so that when the time comes for justice to be served, justice will be served on those who need it.
There's another topic that has a particular historicity to your experience, of course, and that is the introduction of depleted uranium that the British are allegedly going to be putting in, or already have put in, or the U.S. put in. The depleted uranium has come out and been described by Nebezia, Zakharova, and others as a line that won't be allowed to be crossed because of the pollutants, the contaminants, the toxicity, the deformities, everything that you know better than anyone occurs when these depleted uranium rounds are used. We've seen it in Libya and elsewhere. What's your thought on the depleted uranium issue and that being, a move if the British and the Americans take that? It would seem to be something that the Russians cannot allow to be implemented, because it's almost like a dirty war is beginning to be used against other areas of Russia using these weapons.
I mean, let's be clear. Depleted uranium is a poison, and if it's used, it will contaminate the soil, of Ukraine, and therefore contaminate the civilians who live on that soil, who toil on that soil, who use that soil to produce food. There will be a heavy, heavy price to pay. But when Russia says, we will not let this stand, I think a lot of people are saying, well, that means Russia is going to do something to prevent it. No, it's happening. And again, I don't believe Russia is going to sacrifice everything that's been already sacrificed to achieve this victory, and only to throw it away at the last minute because of 1,000 depleted uranium rounds. I think the answer to what Russia is going to do is in the statement that has been recently made by the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, about Russia's new foreign policy. See, Russia has designated itself as one of the great cultures of the world, rightly so, rightly so. But what they're saying in this is that we no longer will allow ourselves to be subordinated to the West. While we don't seek to actively do harm to the West, we reject the notion that the world is a Western-centric world,
Yes.
that the United States gets to make the rules. And so by elevating themselves, they're elevating their foreign policy. Iraq can't speak out about the victims. They can't do anything because they are subordinated to the will of the United States. Kosovo can't speak out about their victims because they're subordinated to the will of the United States. Russia will not be silent about the victims of depleted uranium. That's what I believe the Russians are going to be doing. Russia has said, we are a voice that can never be silenced. We are a force in the world that is present and must be listened to. And they won't use the war. They'll use diplomacy. But what this means is the United States will be called upon to pay a price. And as the United States loses its influence in the world, the notion that we are the exceptional nation, that without us the world can't function, will no longer be there. And the United States will find out that if it wants to be invited into the club that's going to be controlled by Russia, China, India, and others, that it's going to have to be held to account for its actions. And here's where Russia will put the marker down, I believe, to say that you must take care of the problem you caused. You must pay for the health damage you've done to the civilians of Ukraine and Russia. You must pay for the decontamination of the soil that you contaminated. That's what I think Russia's heading. People are saying, well, Russia's going to use nuclear weapons. Russia is the adult in the room. Russia doesn't throw irresponsible temper tantrums. Russia is not the United States. But Russia has said that we are now a major center of power and influence in the world whose voice can't be silenced. And when we tell you, don't do this to us, and you opt to do it, there will be a price. But I think that price will be paid through, diplomatic realities as opposed to, military consequences.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's an accurate assessment. Russia in the future will be putting down the marker for payments that need to be made for the war crimes and the injuries that have been conducted as a result of the U.S. policy. In our last 5 minutes or so, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about your closing remarks too, but also Europe seems to beginning to accelerate in the shifts that were predicted in. Now you're hearing calls for the removal of U.S. troops, armaments bases. You're seeing a little bit more of a separation rising. I think that is going to be something to watch over the next year, especially before next winter, is how Europe is going to potentially shift away from the United States in preference for its own survival. How do you see the European countries sort of evolving and its relationship with the United States?
First of all, it's not going to be an easy transformation. Um, Europe has, for now, many decades, actively subordinated itself, willingly subordinated itself to the United States, to both our military policy, our economic policy, and our diplomatic pressures. Their foreign policies are our foreign policies. Their national security priorities are our national security priorities. Um, and one only has to take a look at the behavior of Germany in the aftermath of the Nord Stream pipeline attacks. That is not the behavior of a sovereign state. That is the behavior of a fully subjugated nation that has lost the ability to express itself independent of its colonial masters. Mm-hmm. And other European countries are like that as well. The tools that America uses to achieve this, though, are becoming dull. One of the primary tools that the United States uses is the primacy of the dollar as a global reserve currency, etc. That is being attacked across the board around the world. People are dropping the dollar quicker than you can drop a bad habit, because it is a bad habit. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is going to contribute to Europe's future, because as Europe is called upon to ditch the dollar in favor of the yuan, or there's talk about BRICS setting up an international reserve currency. Sometime in August, they're going to discuss it at the BRICS meeting. Then the U.S. loses all sorts of leverage that it has right now, that it uses as a mechanism of control. So I think that's down. Now, how long it will take Europe to do this? Understand that nations that have fully subjugated themselves don't have an inherent ability to rise up. They will have to hit rock bottom. And so I still think we're going to be seeing a downward trajectory of Europe. We're going to be seeing a crashing of Europe. And the danger here is that Europe may not be able to rebound in order to collectively distance themselves from the United States. That would be the ideal outcome. Instead, we're going to see Europe erupt into, a sea of chaos, anarchy, potential conflict, very ugly times ahead. And it's their own fault. I mean, the only good news here is that Russia remains the adult in the room, and that Russia doesn't need, or doesn't want, or doesn't desire a chaotic Europe, and that Russia will do everything necessary to soften that fall and assist in the rebound, so long as the rebound doesn't lead to the resurrection of NATO, the European Union, and these other rules-based international order type establishments that have brought so much death, destruction, chaos, and suffering to the world.
Very well way to end it. Very well said, very prophetic, and certainly very deep in the analysis. Scott Ritter, we thank you so much for being a voice of truth, for being light in a world of darkness.
Thanks for having me.